Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all, this time covering The Barrow by Mark Smylie. Mark Smylie wrote a comics series, which you can see the covers of here, called Artesia. There were, I think 21 issues of it, because yeah, three trade paperbacks of 6 issues each, as individual kind of arcs, and then another 3 issues after that. And then also designed a tabletop RPG that is set in the same universe, the same fictional world, Artesia Adventures in the Known World, um, all of which is sort of broad background for The Barrow, which is set in the same world, but is a novel. It's words on a page without any pictures, instead of words and pictures, or in the case of the RPG, words and lots of numbers and pictures. Um, anyway, the Barrow is set a little bit earlier in the timeline, and at least one of the characters is a figure that we meet in the timeline of the comics. Um, but most of the story apparently connects in with the story of the comics. But I haven't gotten all the way to that part because there's a sequel to The Barrow called The Black Heart, that's in 3 parts, and that brings us up to the kind of start of the comics, basically, in terms of the events. But you can sort of see how the things fit together even from this one. The barrow refers to a barrow of Azharad, this ancient evil sorcerer king type, um, one of the adherents of the Worm Kings, and there's all of this kind of very rich mythological and, I guess you'd say, pseudo historical background. There's all these things that are the history of the world, but it's not totally clear how all of the different elements worked. And there's a sort of way in which some of the characters, perhaps, have more or less information about this. Some of the characters kind of just have heard the names and perhaps know very little in details, and some of the characters know a lot more and explain all that. So there's this kind of, interesting, very lived in feeling to that element. And that's one of the real strengths of this book, I would say. The comics do a lot of this too, but there's a lot of really interesting, I guess you'd say, cultural practices and kind of day to day life and lived experience on display that is very much inspired by historical practices. So, for instance, in The Barrow, the novel, there's a funeral, and there's a whole detail about the process of hiring mourners, hiring professional mourners, right? People to go through all of the visible displays of mourning, all of the wailing and tearing at hair and all that sort of stuff, who are not the family or friends of the deceased, but are professionals who do that as a service to demonstrate that the deceased had people who are mourning their passing. So that the actual friends and family don't have to be doing that necessarily in the same way, which is, of course, a real historical detail from certain historical cultures, perhaps even today. I don't know. I'm not familiar with any places that have professional mourners today, but I suppose it's possible. Um, but is also the sort of thing that is the kind of cultural detail that probably slips through the cracks in a lot of fantasy worlds and stories. And so it's really interesting to see that kind of story being told here, basically. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of interesting little details like that, details about the nature of the world. There's even simple things like some of the characters are illiterate and some of them are not, and it's a fairly important distinction between the characters who are illiterate and the characters who have the kind of educated background to allow them to read, as well as it is apparently the right time for there to be a small printing press that is sort of um, growing more and more important as it goes on. It's not clear from what I remember. I don't remember if it is a Gutenberg style printing press with movable type or if it is just a printing press that only prints the one, single impression, which is what they were like before, obviously, which is not as useful for printing whatever you want, but still probably a lot faster than having someone copy it out over and over and over again if you have the one thing that you want to print out. Um, so, that's fun. And there's other, interesting details with like the way that the various guilds work in the towns and their relationships. Some of the stuff with kind of inns and caravanserais and the way that these institutions that are kind of summarized for convenience in a lot of fantasy stories, or perhaps have more to do with the way that they work in a Dungeons and Dragons world than they realistically had to do in a in our historical medieval settings. There's interesting details there, um, and yeah, that's you know it's a lot of fun to see all of those sorts of things taken seriously in this medieval fantasy story, which is, yeah, it's cool. Um, the story itself also has all sorts of things that are not very realistic to um, real medieval history, but have to do with kind of fantasy elements. So the titular Barrow and this kind of general idea of dungeon delving, of course, in real medieval history, there often were not, immense riches hidden away beneath traps and ravenous hordes of orcs and goblins in underground places in the world, and so there was not nearly the same impetus to go dungeon delving. Um, but in this story, there are things that are like that. There's, magical resources and treasures held held in stasis underground places and all that sort of stuff. And there's a sort of attempt to take those concepts seriously. The limitations of vision in Torchlight being an obvious example, but also the idea of like, how do you actually move a fair bit of treasure, which is often very heavy, and how do you like figure out what's going to be where and what you might do about it in order to get treasure out of the you know captive places underground, including there's even I thought it was fun, in basically the prologue there's a dungeon delve that includes what feels like a very classic D&D style adventure sequence, with a immense statue that has gems for eyes and two of the characters getting climbing up on top of the statue and then reaching down and prying out the gemstones that are used for the statue's eyes. That felt to me like such an obvious reference to the concepts of classic D&D and the uh, particularly evocative imagery from some of those old covers and things like that. So that was really fun as a detail because, of course, in the story, there's kind of more going on than just trying to get gemstones for value. There's some other details that are going into that. But yeah, I thought all of that is sort of related to how this book feels to read as like a fantasy story that has kind of dungeon delving elements and stuff. And all that is good. It's also, I think, just a fairly well written book. It's fun to read. There's a real kind of fun, ironic voice to a lot of the narration that I liked a lot. It, feels fun and interesting, and also willing to drop that kind of level of irony in times when the story is more serious and we, need to take things seriously because bad stuff is happening and all that. So yeah, I liked the Barrow a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun, and totally worth checking out if you have a chance. Worth checking out the other stuff that I mentioned too. The Artesia comics I read a couple years ago, and haven't read them since, but I liked them a lot when I read them. I thought they were a lot of fun. Um, and the Artesia Adventures in the Known World RPG seems really interesting. I have not played it. Who knows if I ever will play it because it is fairly involved, shall we say? But it looks really cool, and the art is gorgeous, and that's always a fun thing by itself. So anyway, the Barrow, it's I don't remember, 600 pages, 600 and something maybe. Um, Not a difficult read, I would say. Totally worth checking it out. Oh, I totally skipped over. There is a fair bit of sexual stuff in this book in a way that a lot of, I think, fantasy writing doesn't get nearly as into the sexual side of human behavior. And obviously, for any given reader, sex in a book can be sort of like spice in food, where a little bit goes a long way and too much is very quickly overpowering to the experience. Um, and I guess what I will say is that I don't think it made it, difficult for me to read this and enjoy this book or anything like that. I still had a lot of fun. I didn't feel like it was too much, but there are probably some readers who would. And therefore, I guess if you feel like you fall under that category, then, you don't need to read this one necessarily, even though I think it's pretty good and totally worth checking out. Yeah. Anyway, that is going to be it for me for today for The Barrow by Mark Smylie. Go check it out if you think it sounds interesting to you. Leave a comment down below if you have read The Barrow or Artesia, or if there's anything you think I should read that is related or even not related or whatever else. Yeah, feel free to leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I have been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.